Hello there, everyone. This is Zephyr with a republish of my Saltguard mod, which is for Salt and Sacrifice. This mod originated as an experiment with blocks and parries, hence its name, and I feel like I've done pretty well on getting that to feel better. It is different, though. It has, however, evolved to adjusting other aspects of the game, attempting to balance things like weapons not having weight, or just weight in general, poise, and stagger, and some other stuff. It does embrace existing parts and pieces as they are, so there are some somewhat extreme changes in this update. So this is version 1.5.0, or in other words, it's version 5 with no bug fixes. And there are still plans to add more stuff to this version, but some of them are tricky or tedious or time-consuming, and I'm not sure quite yet when I'm going to get around to that. So a 1.5.1 will probably cover some bug fixes, but a 0.2 might cover some actual content. So just an overview of the mod. We're going to read through all of the changes that are documented here. Hopefully I've gotten everything documented correctly and in this page. This page is public, and it is attached to the Nexus Mods page and shared in the community Discord for this YouTube channel. So Saltguard has dedicated save folders. When you boot up Saltguard the first time, it will look at your save folder. It will then copy all your saves to a new folder, and then Saltguard will only read that new folder. So it's not changing any of your characters. There are save file differences, so they are not reverse engineerable, or at least reverse version compatible. So you cannot use a Saltguard save with vanilla, but you can use a vanilla save with Saltguard. It will automatically fast forward the save to the new changes. Saltguard does work with multiplayer. One of the developers, Shane, who wrote the multiplayer, he worked with me to make sure that people that were using mods were not getting shadow banned on accident for cheating. So it does work with multiplayer. That's not new to this version, but it does get updated every version so that the pool is limited to that version. You will only be able to connect with other Saltguard mod users, and this mod is only for Steam. It used to be for Epic, but it is only for Steam now. So I've switched over. So as I said, there are a lot of blocking and parrying changes. I'm just going to be reading through the patch notes here, and if I need to, kind of pausing and discussing. But blocks are now animation locked for 0.3 seconds, which means that they are automatically held for an animation. One of the things I love about, say, Dark Souls-like games, and Salt 1 especially, is that every animation has a commitment. And in Salt 2, I call it Salt 2 anyways, it's technically a prequel, but for Salt 2, blocking was instantaneous. So you could tap it and then release it, and there was a small bug that I'm not sure if it was ever fixed or not, but I was told it was a bug, was that you should be able to tap block and it should auto parry still within the parry window. It was not doing that as of, I believe, the major DLC with the sixth area. So at one point in Saltguard's history, I did add that so that blocks are automatically parried always. But then I later changed it to be animation locked so that it is just simply held, which is more on parity with Salt 1, where if you have to parry in Salt 1, it does do an actual parry animation, and during that animation you are fully parried. Here, however, it is not fully parried during that animation. You are locked into it, which means that you can fail that parry. So the parry timer has not been changed. It is 0.15 seconds, and the block animation is locked for 0.3, which means that half of that animation, the latter half, is a fail state, which means that you will do a normal block, take the poise, and potentially some damage depending on your weapon or shield, since those are combined in this game. There's vanguards and there's regular weapons. The parry cooldown timer. This is a fail state timer. was a spam prevention technique that is in the base game. I have cut that from 1 second to 0.5 seconds. This is a lot more lenient. It does mean that you can kind of spam your parries. They're intentionally offset a little bit from the block animation, and I may change that further so that it is an abnormal amount of time to avoid any form of auto parry spam if that ever comes up. But I doubt it will. We're a small community. Block stamina cost is now reduced on a sliding scale. Low values are unchanged. So a low value is anything, I think it's like 10 or below, completely unchanged. And then it's a sliding scale, so purely linear. As you approach 80 poise damage, then it slowly slides up to 20% reduced stamina cost on the block stamina. Basically, poise damage is the stamina cost. So this was done a while back in a previous version, probably version 1.3. I don't remember off the top of my head. So it is different from the solution that was then done last year in the rebalance patch by Ska Studios. I have intentionally not integrated multiple things from that rebalance patch because I had already done or wanted to do solutions related to them. The block animation itself has been sped up by 50%, excuse me, the block stun animation. So first you pick up your weapon and you do a block animation. Then when you actually block an enemy, you do a secondary block stun animation. It's the block hit, if you will. And every weapon has their own little special block hit. But this hit animation is a form of stagger itself. It lasts quite a long time, so it's been sped up by 50%. That same block stun animation can also now be escaped with a light attack. It was allowed to dodge roll out of it, but you weren't able to attack out of it, which was kind of unfair because enemies can block you and immediately attack. You can't block and immediately attack. There is some timer to it, so it's still not perfectly one-to-one with enemies, but it's definitely more fair than not allowing it at all. Parries, and when I say parries, I do mean perfect block, but I call them parries because it's an easier word to say. Parries no longer cost stamina at all. So in the base game, I don't know why this was decided upon. When you parry, it costs stamina based on the poise of the attack. It's a small percentage of it, but it's something like 3 to 7 poise to stamina. So you'd perfect block like a heavy hit. And heavy hits don't do any kind of stagger retaliation to the enemy, to the boss in vanilla. And you'd parry that, and it would cost you, say, 6 stamina. And that's all it did, is it just blocked the attack. And based on how parries in vanilla feel, this was almost never viable or useful, and it costs stamina, and you might as well just roll for 15 stamina instead of using a perfect block and possibly failing. And so that's true of both heavy hits and regular hits. So normal parries are blue, and heavy hit parries are red, but they're actually overlaid on top of the blue, which makes them purple. So purple parries are the ones that cost more in vanilla, and both of these now cost 0. They do still stop your stamina from regenerating, as vanilla also does that with all major actions. The perfect block window has been extended on success only to protect from fast enemies you can't quite react to with a second action. This is repeatable and may need restrictions or adjustments. So what do I mean by this? If you have, when you use your parry, you're not yet hit potentially, and then some amount of time happens, and then you're hit, but you're still in the perfect block window. But maybe you only have 3 frames left of that window. You hit it near the end of the window. Another enemy has already been swinging, and you won't physically have the time to press block again because you're in block animation, the game is still processing, the game runs at 60 plus frames per second, can only handle, you know, certain inputs at a certain speed. And so there are situations where you only have 1 frame left, 1/60th of a second. When I say frame, I do mean the base 60 frames. The game does run faster than that if you set it faster than that. And that is logical ticks in Sacrifice. So if it's running faster, it is doing the logic faster, and there are more minutia and incremental calculations. I don't agree that it should have been that way, though. I think it probably should have just been locked to 60 logical, but is what it is. They ran into issues as well, and removed higher frame rates from the game after release. So there you have it. So, but yeah, it extends that. So if you only have 1 frame or even 0.1 seconds left of your perfect block window, and you successfully perfect block an enemy, it will then extend that window. It's just a timer. It will extend that for 5 frames, which is 0.833 seconds in the 1/60. It protects you from fast enemies. So if you have a ton of small enemies, you could potentially parry one of them, and then auto parry the next one because your window is extended, and then auto parry another one because your window is extended. And this may need adjustments or restrictions, because there could be a situation where you get stuck in an auto parry until eventually you just either can't do anything because you're parrying the whole time, or something. And I just haven't tested that extreme circumstance, and I don't know if it's actually possible to get stuck in that yet. So parries are a lot better, hopefully, with all these changes. A lot of numerical changes, a lot of frame data manipulation at the logic level, for speed ups and slowdowns and stuff like that. Parry damage. There is a brand new stat on artifacts so artifacts got reworked. We'll talk about that later down the list. Damage returned on parry is a percentage. It works as a form of thorns. It returns the damage dealt back to the attacker, which can sometimes be kind of bad because they usually resist those. So it'll kind of be worse against mages to some degree. And because it's percentage damage, it means that a lot of the early game enemies do 10 or 12 damage. So if you had 10% reflection, you would be there a while. You'd be there quite a while. So there is a base damage of 5 physical that has been added into the formula. This is my own system to begin with, so I get to decide how it works either way. So as long as you have the damage returned on parry stat equipped from an artifact or a special on a weapon, then you automatically get the 5 base physical damage, and a dagger does 6, just for reference. So it is very low, but it is a base damage, which allows you to actually play the game if you wanted to, and I'm hoping that a certain streamer does. You could potentially parry or post the entire game now with this stat. You would have to be a little lucky to get a Thorns artifact really early. So in lieu of that, I created the Scaling Vanguard as a guaranteed Thorns on parry. It only does the base damage, and it has a 0% reflection. This item also has a 40% drop rate as long as you do not own one. And then all parries now deal stagger to mages. So parries typically reverse the stamina to an enemy, and stamina going to 0 is what actually puts them into a riposte animation. Mages, on the other hand, actually go into their downed or head grapple state due from certain ratios of health, as well as hitting 0 poise from the stagger damage. So reversing this in the code, or changing this in the code so that mages only get dealt stagger damage from the parries, they now will be able to be opened up with a head grapple attack from parries themselves, which again allows the game to be played entirely parry riposte between the Thorns damage and the parry changes. So a lot of changes. That's the reason the game is called Saltguard, or the mod is called Saltguard, because, well, I wanted it to feel a little better. Now, a disclaimer, I've never actually played Sekiro, but I understand that some aspects of this game were inspired by Bloodborne and Sekiro and Monster Hunter World, per James. And so I wanted to make parries and blocks feel like parries and blocks a little bit more. I wanted the game to be able to be played fast-paced parry if you wanted to. That should be an option. It shouldn't be required, but it should be an option. So these are some of the original goals of the mod. And from there, I decided to do a lot more. So, stats. Carry weight and endurance. Players now have 5 extra carry weight. I did experiment in an earlier version, 1.0 or 1.1, with having weapons each having a weight and having that weight automatic and assigned per weapon class. So all hammers weighed 6 and daggers weighed 1 and swords weighed 3 and stuff like that. It wasn't very high. I don't think players really cared, the people that tested the mod. So I removed it in version 3, I think it was. And but I left in some of the carry weight increase that I had put in there to offset the weapons. I do think that carry weight is a little low in both games, as I was able to oversee, well, actually I was able to design and create the enhanced version, enhanced game mode for Salt and Sanctuary itself. That is something similar to what I did there. So carry max is a little bit higher, and carry per endurance is also 25% larger. So if you invest into endurance, you actually get a little bit more of a value out of it than you previously did. There was a weird intricacy that James or Shane put into the game, though, where level 6 and level 7 endurance, so you start with 5 endurance, 5 all stats, right? You level it up once, and that first point that you get would give you 2 carry weight. Just something weird like that. And then the second point, the 7th level, would also give that second bonus carry weight. So at level 7, you'd have +2 on top of the +2. You'd have double for just those 2 points. So in essence, this bonus carry weight here that you start with, it's +5, but it's really closer to kind of a +3 because this has been removed and standardized. There's all sorts of early weirdness in alpha, and I was able to get this removed. In alpha, there was a double soft cap on, I think it was focus, where the first 5 points gave a certain amount, and then the remaining 25 points gave a different amount. And then you hit the regular soft cap at 40. So I was able to get that removed in alpha testing. But there's some weirdnesses there still, such as this endurance carry weight. There is even one class that starts at like 77% carry weight. So I don't think that really should be happening. I think you could be starting at 70% carry weight and still really struggle to get to, so to say, roll 2 when you're stuck in roll 3 at that heavy weight. Furthermore, because I've played this game on vanilla completely unarmed, if you haven't seen those videos and you want to, it's just a handful of bosses. It's not every boss, but I did beat the entire game and show off all the major bosses that I fought in the order that I fought them. The final boss literally took me 14 minutes or 13 and a half or something because he's physically resistant and fists do no damage. But if you want to attempt something similar in the mod, you get 5 bonus carry weight just for being unarmed. And I expect that this could also be abused, and I'm kind of not super concerned about it. So if you wanted to quick swap to being unarmed for a faster roll in certain circumstances, I guess you could do that. We'll call it a movement tech. I'm going to try to speed this up a little bit. We're not very far in. Health and vitality. Health has been increased by 6 at base level, but you no longer gain health per level up. You normally gained 1.0 per level up, so you're basically starting with 6 extra levels worth of health and then not getting any from level ups anymore. I'm not a huge fan of vitality in a lot of games. I really liked Salt and Sanctuary's whole HP from levels where there was no other stat that gave HP, because it created a progression curve that was within the base game that you didn't have to control or manipulate or guess to figure out how much health you needed. Salt 2 was originally not going to have a skill tree. If you go look at the original release trailer or the teaser trailer, it just has stat points like Dark Souls, and you just leveled them up. And so I think that was one of the ideas here. So I have gone back and looked at Dark Souls 1 because it's my favorite Dark Souls. And one of the things that Dark Souls 1 did was that you started around the Deprived, I think, has 11 all stats. So it is different from Salt and Sanctuary, where you start with 5. But you basically gain approximately double health as you reach the general soft cap to vitality. Now, in Dark Souls, it's not the same amount of health per point. It's all over the place. So one level gives you 23, another gives you maybe 25, another gives you 30, and another gives you 18. So this is all just linear here. It's much simpler, and I'm very okay with just embracing simplicity in that context. So HP is now scaled over 125 health and 35 points, because you start at 5 and you go to 40. So instead of 2.0 vitality, you get 3.57. And I know it's a weird number, but it does add up to an extra 125% of your base health. So it is a little bit more than Dark Souls would give you, but Dark Souls is within like 3 percentage points of plus 100% from the around the soft cap of vitality. So it's very inspired from that and embraces that. And then we only have one system for health instead of 2 in this context, at least. There's still artifacts and equipment and whatever else going on. Health potions have been buffed significantly from 50% over 5 seconds to 80% over 4 seconds. This puts them on par per second with Salt 1, which was 100% over 5. They can now be field crafted, but you have less potions. So they're stronger, you have less, and it feels a lot more like Sanctuary, in my opinion, because of this. I didn't want to give you overhealing. So, 80% over 4 seconds is still really good. And generally, you're not going to be overhealing with that. But it feels good. And most of the time, if you're at like 20% health, you're or below 20% health, you're probably going to not notice that it didn't heal you to 100% if you're 97 or 95% full. In addition, I didn't write this here, but in addition, all craftable herbs that are used for health potions are also reduced in carrying. So normally you can carry something like 10 or 15. I don't remember what the number is at the moment. However, here it is only 6. So you can only craft 6 max potions at once. And you can carry a maximum of, I believe it's 12 or 13, or I think it's 13 or 15 in the base game. It's 2 less. You can craft 2 less total. So I believe it's 13 or 12 max in the mod, which then is that you would require 2 crafting sessions to get all your potions back. And the same has been done for ammo. Your carrying of Irona ore has been reduced to be approximately half of your ammo. Half of your late game maximum ammo. So it's high in the early game. Since you start with only 3 potions, you're always going to craft all 3 potions to full if you're missing them. And you have herbs. Stamina and willpower, which is just called will in this game, but it was willpower in the first game. Base stamina is increased from 67 to 70. 67 was a weird number. I didn't like it. It technically correlated with something like 4.5 rolls. Which was probably where it came from, but I don't know that for sure. It's just a guess, since a roll is 15 and 67 is approximately half of that, or 4.5 of that. I've been normalizing costs, however, here. So anything that costs stamina is just, 3% or whatever more expensive. So there's nothing actually changed here. It's just a numerical change at the base. Other things have been changed, though. So stamina burst after action pause is now halved. How this worked was for about half a second after your stamina has been paused from an action, the next half a second where you start regenerating is actually faster than the rest of the regeneration. This was added in post-release as people were struggling to manage their stamina, and stamina regeneration maybe just wasn't very good. I don't know. You know, that's really a bit subjective. I don't want to say get good, so I won't. So I did nerf this, though. I felt like it made stamina management inconsequential afterwards. And then in the DLC rebalance, one of those two patches, James then further made that actually dependent on light armor or no armor in your armor slots. So you would get 100% of the burst if you had 4 light armor or 4 unarmored slots, but none of it if you had heavy armor in there. So the stamina burst was just completely turned off if you were wearing heavy armor. So it is like before the patch, where you always get it, but it is now halved. Willpower now grants stamina regeneration, though. I didn't want to buff willpower itself as like raw stamina, so I decided to buff the regen, and so you get 15% bonus at soft cap, ish, something like that. It might be a little bit, it might be less than that. It's let me see here. I wrote down 15%. Yeah, it is 15%. So there you go. So your base stamina regeneration is 35 per second, just for reference. So you'll get 5.25 if you cap out your willpower to soft cap. You still get that after soft cap. It's just, you know, soft capped. Negative stamina is now restricted to soft cap stamina times -1, or simply 105, negative 105. In the base game, for whatever reason, it was actually 4 times your current maximum, which meant that the more stamina that you had, the deeper negative you could go at a 4 times rate. And this was almost entirely used for blocking, where if you like block a big hit, your stamina could go super negative, and I don't really care. So negative 105, that's still going to take you 3 seconds to regenerate. I think it's plenty it's a small change. I know it's probably a meaningless change for most people, but this means that if you block a really heavy hit, you're not going to be going negative, 430 stamina, which means that you probably die, because when you're negative stamina, you have like 60% action speed on everything, or negative 60% action speed on everything, something like that. Movement speed. Movement speed is weird. A lot of people will talk about movement speed in this game feeling sluggish. It's actually the same speed as the original game. The problem is that all the characters are bigger, so the game is actually zoomed out. So 500 movement speed in this game isn't the equivalent to 500 movement speed in the original game, but they use the same base movement speed, more or less. So we do have 500 in the base game, the Salt and Sanctuary game. So I am just kind of mimicking that. But I just kind of gave you 5 extra at the top, and you can lose 5 extra at the bottom if you're really heavy. Movement speed is a new stat, though. It can be found on gear now. It previously could not. Poise from armor pieces has been doubled across the board. This is just a multiplier in the game. It only affects armor pieces, not rings, not artifacts, just armor pieces. So if you put the poise amulet or ring on, you're still going to just get 10. That's it. But poise in this game was pretty bad, and things hit hard, both damage and stagger wise. And so I doubled it at one point in a previous patch, and then Ska Studio's balance patch added a change to this where you had to invest into endurance, and you'd get a flat like 32 poise over the course of investing into the soft cap. And then you had to wear 4 pieces of heavy armor to get the 100% of it. So if you only wore 1 piece of heavy armor, you only got 1/4 of it. It's just overly complicated. I don't like it, so I didn't reintegrate that when I merged the versions, or merged the mod back into the the current public version. So I don't like their solution here. My solution was earlier, and it's like way simpler to understand. Hey, armor has better poise. It's still heavy though. The end. Not to say that they're like super wrong in their solution. I just really prefer simplistic solutions. If you've watched any of my other videos on mechanics, you'll understand that I like depth from simplicity, not depth from complexity. Shards, silver, and experience. So salt was made so that it didn't drop if you were guiltless and died in the balance patch. I have ignored this. Your salt always drops because I'm embracing the Dark Souls aspect of picking up your bloodstain. I wish the salt bat was in this game because that was cool. I wish the salt enchantment was in this game because that was cool. It really sets Salt and Sanctuary apart, in my opinion, from the Souls series, where an enemy would steal your salt and you'd have to go kill the enemy, which, if it was a normal enemy, now had 50% more damage or 50% more health, or maybe it was even 100% more health or something like that. So that's been ignored, their solution here. They were just trying to make the game a little less punishing. I don't think the game needs to be less punishing. I think it needs to be more fair. There's those, and I consider those different things. Silver is now 10% loss on death, like gold was in Salt and Sanctuary, instead of 50% loss on death, which I don't understand. I've talked to James, the developer, before about this, and I just don't understand the reasoning on this. Silver is not a strong resource, so who cares? And silver retained on death is no longer an artifact stat. It has been disabled for old artifacts, and it is not an artifact stat on new artifacts. So it's always 10%. You don't have to worry about it. It's something that you can put in the back of your mind of, don't die, you lose a little bit of your money. And again, kind of, who cares? Guiltless shards now give 0.5 armor per level instead of plus 10. This was from the balance patch where they tried to make guiltless shards better. Because previously you would lose out on 25% of your maximum health. You now get that for free. I do include that in the mod. You get that for free still. But guiltless shards no longer give 10 flat armor. One of the things about flat armor or gear armor that is not from armor itself, boots, hats, gloves, chest, is that they don't weigh anything, which can offset the heavy to light armor ratio pretty heavily, very quickly. When you're just getting plus 10, and early heavy armors only give you something like 11 armor. So you're just basically making heavy armors completely useless very, very early on, which can shift the perception of the game. And also, I just don't like that. I think heavy armors should be heavy. I think they should give you a lot of stuff. And so this is an offset of the player having a 0.4 armor per level by default. In Salt 1, it was 1.125, so it is still smaller in Salt 2. I'm still not a huge fan of the armor per level, but I'm trying to embrace what's already there instead of just simply removing things. So you no longer have any armor if you're naked and haze burnt. But if you are not naked and not haze burnt, you will have quite a bit more armor, but it's by level. Weapons. Great hammers are significantly larger and have increased reach to match, and they look a lot more like Sanctuary. The original version of this was probably 2 times bigger. I think the current version is something like 80% or 70% bigger. They're not quite as crazy large. But surprisingly, I was able to get that to work. It's purely a multiplier on the draw and the reach, and it just happens to work relatively well. Other weapons are subject to similar adjustments. If you feel that, like, great blades or two-handed swords or something else is just not quite matching up its animation or its power fantasy, I still want this game to feel like a Salt game in my mind. If you're going to call it a Salt game, make it a Salt game. So if you feel like some of the bigger weapons don't feel like bigger weapons, then let's fix that. And if some of the smaller weapons don't feel like smaller weapons, then again, let's fix that. Subject to change, but katanas do have +1 frame of parry window, making them easier to parry with, because I thought that was funny. or fun or something. I've been told that makes no sense, and I'm okay with that too. This might be changed. It might be moved to another weapon. Who knows? So you get let's see, you get 10 frames of parry instead of 9, something like that. Katanas also have really low block percentage, so if you mess it up, you do get a lot of damage and stamina loss. So for me, it kind of plays off as this idea of you have to play it perfect or you're going to get really hard punished on a katana. The Sculling Vanguard has a 0% Thorns on parry special, so it always does the base damage. Basically, it's just if you're using this, it always does the base damage. This is meant so that you're not getting some kind of extra bonus on top of the artifact bonuses or other gear that might give parry thorns. The Sculling Vanguard has a 40% chance to drop if you do not own one. It can't be in your stash or on your person and are under level 5. The under level 5 is just an abuse restriction so that you can't just go in and farm Vanguards for some reason, and it's, I don't know. I'm an old QA guy, and that's my first impression is somebody is going to abuse this. What's my protection to this? So that's my protection to this. You can start with one, you can farm them early, but once you pick one up or something, or level 5 or 6, you can no longer farm them. They'll go back to their, I think it's a 5% chance normally, which is garbage, but nonetheless, that's pretty typical of these kind of games. Fast Hitter. So Fast Hitter is a special that is found on certain weapons. It is a hidden special, as all specials on weapons are hidden intentionally. It's meant for discovery, apparently. The specials were 15% bonus attack speed and 20% bonus attack speed, and these were multiplicative to all other forms of attack speed. I have reduced them to 1.1 and 1.15, so from 15 to 10 and 20 to 15. I'd rather you get this from elsewhere, kind of, but also I felt like 20% attack speed on specific weapons is a bit extreme, and I know that there's a few weapons that have this that in PvP became kind of core to PvP just because of how fast they moved. But Slow Hitter also was kind of, it was a divisor, and so it was a 10% divisor and a 15% divisor, and I've just simply changed this to a plus or minus. And Fast Hitter and Slow Hitter are now completely additive to artifacts in any other form of attack speed. So I believe it was additive in Salt 1, and I'm just returning it to that. So if you have 15 attack speed, you're basically removing the Slow Hitter entirely, which means that you can remove the Slow Hitter within the gameplay, potentially. It is possible to offset it, similar to the first game where you could offset it by a single Mossy Charm, which was the only thing that gave attack speed. Ranged weapon damage. So a lot of the ranged weapons, if not all of them, straight up do way too much damage early game. And then I know that they are restricted by ammo, but that's not really a big restriction with a lot of the changes that happen post-release. You can cough up ammo or something like that by stabbing yourself. Don't remember exactly. It's one of the nameless keepsakes that you can buy from the nameless keeper guy, the NPC that was in the tiny little update after release. And so you can basically have infinite ammo. And so I wanted you to be able to kind of field craft and even boss craft ammo more regularly in this mod. Same with potions. Like you can field craft potions, maybe you can boss craft potions. But the thing is they do too much damage. So you'll start off, if you're playing, I don't know, the Ranger or something, he has a spear, and I think the spear does like 10 or maybe 12 or somewhere in that damage, probably 11 damage. But then you pull out their bow, and it's like a starting bow, and it does like 18 or 19 damage per shot, and it's like, well, why would I ever use my spear? So all range damage has been nerfed by 20%. This is a multiplier on the final damage, but it can be given back by artifacts which have been buffed to give more range damage. So it is more of a power curve change than a across the board nerf. If you want to focus on range damage, you can, and you can get this back. Some of the things I want to do, I want to give the katana backstep some iframes or a smaller hitbox or some phasing. This has been suggested by multiple people, including myself, but development on this game has basically come to a complete stop. It did not sell as well, apparently, as was hoped, which means that Ska Studios as a whole, which I am only a contractor for, I am not part of Ska Studios, has moved on to another game. There is no public information on what that game is. It is not necessarily a Salt game. It is not necessarily Charlie Murder 2. The rumors are, they're just rumors. There's no information on what this next game is, other than I think James has said that there are swords in it. And the maps are big. And that's about it. I think that's it. So they have moved on. So I want to do some of the things that were originally suggested, and James saw some of these as being pretty cool and as a concept. I wanted to push myself as a creative designer and developer to be able to make these happen. I do not have all the tooling for this game. I don't have any of the tooling for this game, as I'm not contracted to work on this game. So I am doing this purely by reverse engineering, we'll call it that, the code in aspects. So I want to give the katana backstep some kind of smaller hitbox or phasing. How this works is when you, I think it's a light attack into a heavy attack, you will swing and then back up, sheathe your sword, and then step forward and then do a heavy attack. It's a cool little thing. It's got a cool little sound effect, and it is completely useless other than being cool. And I wanted it to actually have some kind of value to it. So if it could have some kind of like phasing or smaller some small iframe or something, the idea would be that you could actually use it to backstep an attack, not get hit, and then step forward into that same target and hit them. I think that'd be really cool. I don't want it to be like overpowered or crazy broken in PvP or something like that, but just an experimental concept. So I think a smaller hitbox primarily would work, which would act as if it was phasing, because you just wouldn't be hit by most attacks, because they'd be attacking towards your center of mass, or center of your hitbox, basically your location hitbox. And so if your location hitbox was smaller and shifted to the backside of your body, then you just simply would not get hit, which I think would be neat. I want to do something similar with vanguards and shield attacks. So there are two shield attacks. One is the running smash, and the other one is like some kind of sort of parry-looking thing from Salt 1 that is, I think, the second or third attack in a combo. I wanted to basically give these a form of auto block. The problem with doing this, if I do it wrong, is you could potentially auto block a bunch of hits all at once, or auto block a boss hit, and then just lose, a billion stamina. So that will have to be figured out in some aspect, but I want to do that same concept with the Vanguard actions. I also want to rework Hyper Armor. It was added post-release, I believe, in the DLC, the free DLC that they did for the Alterstone Lost City, whatever. It's only on big weapons. It's something like 100 poise while you're attacking. You won't get staggered, but once it triggers, it goes on cooldown for like 3.5 seconds. So it's hyper armor with a massive cooldown, but it's also a massive amount of bonus poise. So if you have 100 extra poise for one attack, that's neat. But then it's also teaching you to play wrong, kind of, because you don't know that information. So I want to rework Hyper Armor to be weaker, but make sense in a lot of different situations and be more reliable. Generally, I don't like being canceled out of attacks in the Salt games. I think it feels weird in Salt and Sanctuary compared to Dark Souls for some reason. I can't pinpoint that. But it's very common to kind of hit at the same time as another enemy and just be instantly staggered or thrown. I guess it's probably the ragdoll effect mostly, which I actually like ragdolls. I'm sad that they got nerfed, but they may be kind of buffed back into existence in this mod, so be warned. But hyper armor should offset some of that. So one of the things I want to put hyper armor is the down stab, the aerial the ground strike, drop strike, which has already been buffed by damage. It's now considered an actual heavy attack. So it's not done, but I'd like to go revisit how they did it and then reuse some of their code to do it for basically every weapon. So if you're doing, say, and this is just a personal beef with some of the Salt animations. If you're doing a drop strike on someone and they hit you with an arrow and you stagger because the arrow does 10 stagger damage and you have 9 poise or something, that's super frustrating, and your character will do a mid-air stagger animation and then drop right by their feet, basically, because you were trying to drop on top of them. And in Salt 2, enemies are really fast. So they will pull out a sword and start stabbing you almost immediately, so you have to roll as soon as you get up. And this feels kind of bad because, well, I was doing a drop attack on you. First of all, maybe you shouldn't have seen me. I don't know. And second of all, why does an arrow stagger me out of basically falling on you with a blade? Because I've got momentum, you know? So I want to put that into the game. Again, it's a creative decision. I want to experiment with it. And just some core combat stuff. So if you're in the middle of an animation, or if you're, in the first 25% of an animation, you might have 10 extra poise in that animation. So you're using the katana, you're using the daggers, and you're in the middle of, say, the daggers have a double stab, which is really slow, and it feels off for the daggers to have a slow double stab, kind of. So some of those little things that I want to do is like make it so that you can't get staggered as easily out of that double stab. Maybe the first half of the animation has extra poise. The second half does not. So you can still get staggered, but if you get staggered when it's completing, then both targets get hit. If you're getting staggered in the first portion of it, just you are getting hit, and that kind of sucks. As well, I want to make that cancelable. I think daggers should have a lot of their attacks. Daggers and some of the lighter weapons probably should be able to be canceled mid-animation. I don't want to do like full cancels. So like, we're not doing gun reload cancels here. That's not my goal here. I still want you to commit to an attack. But if you are using a heavier attack within a combo, like the double dagger stab, I want you to be able to potentially cancel that before you do the damage. So there's no advantage to canceling it other than defense. And daggers make sense to be able to, say, roll cancel that. I really thought this was going to be shorter, but there's a lot here. So, heavy attacks, special attacks. For whatever reason, heavy attacks had a stamina cost ratio of 1.5, but only did 1.2 damage and 1.0 stagger damage. This has been remedied to some degree. All heavy attacks that had 1.2 times damage are now a 1.3 times damage. For reference, however, they were 1.5 in Salt 1. But I have frame by frame analyzed some of these attacks, and almost every heavy attack is a 20% slower animation. So what James was most likely doing, James and Shane were most likely doing, was timing the ratio of the attack speed to the damage, but for other reason, maybe they forgot to mess with the stamina or poise ratios. So for whatever reason, poise was always 1.0 on players. It's not always 1.0 on enemies, but it was always on players. So your quick attacks on your daggers, your quick attacks on your spears, those were doing 100% of the poise while being only 75% of the damage. So those are nerfed, those quicker attacks, and the heavy attacks are buffed. But they are now fair. They should be fair. The stamina ratio is now 1.3. The damage ratio is now 1.3. The poise ratio is now 1.3. I hope that makes sense, because it's relatively simple to just have those match up. If the stamina cost ratio buff is too much, we can go back to the 1.5. That will require testing and feedback, because I think it feels fine, but maybe it's too much. Drop attacks are now considered a heavy attack, as previously mentioned, so they do 1.3 ratio. If I can get them a little extra poise in the motion, in the animation, so that you don't get staggered out of them while falling as easily by a simple arrow, then, you know, drop attacks should be pretty fun. Damage and charms and math and other things here. So charms are intended to stack 100%. However, there are many duplicates and somewhat unique modifiers that probably shouldn't stack their effects. So in lieu of that, to protect the release of this version, rings are only stacking 100%, and amulets and daggers do not stack ever. For example, there is a ceremonial dagger that you can equip, a charm dagger, that deals that grants 15% bonus runic arts damage. Which makes sense. It's like, you know, evil sacrificial dagger or something like that. Actually, I think it's from the Mind Flayer looking confusion boss mage, which I can't remember the name of apparently. But there's also an amulet from another mage that gives 15% runic arts damage. And so in the base game, the idea is you could kind of wear one or the other. And there was diminishing returns and all this other stuff that was super punishing, in my opinion. But I don't want them to stack and become 30% runic arts damage, because that feels excessive. And so amulets and daggers do not stack currently. But the goal is to eventually remove that restriction that I have packed in there at the last minute to release this mod, this version of the mod. I want to remove that in the future so that every slot of your rings, your 2 rings, your amulet, and your charm dagger are completely additive, completely stackable, more of like an ARPG Diablo, something like that, where it just stacks. There might be some effects that are unique, like heal on kill or heal on riposte or something like that, and I will just have to edit the text fields and say, hey, this is a unique effect. You can't get double heal by equipping it twice. But I have not done that right now, so if it's on a ring, it always stacks with the same stat on another ring. Which means that like things like stamina rings, health rings, damage rings, these are really powerful now. Go abuse them, they're fun. And I'm okay with that. A lot of charms are being moved around to remove those duplicates. So in some follow-up update, either 0.1 or 0.2, probably more of a 0.2, a lot of these duplicates will be removed or adjusted or changed. Things that maybe don't make sense for being a late game boss drop, boss craft from drops, things like that. So some specifics of nerfs and changes so far. The leather ring attack boost, which is 10%, is now only melee. So previously you couldn't stack it, kind of. It was a 25% value shift, so you could stack 2 of them for 12.5%. Now you could stack 2 of them for 20%, but it only affects melee. It doesn't affect melee, ranged, and magic, which is what it did before. But the actual description on it, it says attacks, so it makes sense to me that it's only attacks and not everything. And I'm considering melee to be attacks in this context. The gold ring attack boost. The gold ring is a kind of a 50-50 attack defense ring. It was apparently really bad for the actual defense, though. It is also now only melee, following the same change as the leather ring. The Empyrean, and yes, that is spelled right, the Empyrean amulet attack boost when below 20% is currently unchanged. It affects all damage as expected. So you can still potentially play a low health mage, you know, in that 20% range. And I may increase that to like 30% or 25% or some other change. But that low health bonus is 50% and it affects all damage because, well, it's a risk reward thing. Otherwise, the leather ring would probably be just triple S tier because you just wear 2 of them and every single character would wear the exact same things. The gold ring no longer gives 2 stamina per second because apparently it did. I don't think anybody knew this, and I only found this out in the past week because I was digging around in these kind of stats and messing with their numbers and found out that there was a charm somewhere doing this, so I figured out which charm it was, and that was what it was. It was giving, what is that, a 6% bonus or something? And then Gold Ring's defense boost from 2.5 to 5% flat, all defense. So I don't know what 2.5 flat was supposed to achieve there. It was really small. I didn't realize it was that small. And no, it wasn't a percentage. It was just 2.5 all stats or all defenses. And that's a 2.5% increase to your effective health percent. And if you have literally any real health percentage already from armor, then it's kind of useless. So anyways, moving on. Scholar's Amulet, same thing. It was 3.1 flat. For whatever reason, I've changed that to 10% all defenses. So it is kind of similar to the gold ring being a 5.5 and the leather ring being a 10%. This is also a 10%. Scholar's Amulet, I might buff that just looking at it because it is an amulet and there's no other thing that does it. So maybe it gets buffed to 15%. But since there is the gold ring with 5%, maybe that's fine because you could get 20% total while still having 10% melee damage. So got to be careful with that. I'm not trying to remove too many items, just kind of move them around or change some stuff that just feels not so useful. The HP ring now adds 7 flat HP instead of 5%. 7 HP is approximately 2 vitality points. It's a little less, but it's about 2 points of vitality. You do have higher base health in the game with those plus 6 points. So wearing this, because it does come from the first boss, the first mage, Pyromancer, the HP ring or the fire ring gives this health. So you could craft 2 of these, immediately have 14 bonus health, but it's really plus 20 with the base HP increase. But you don't get life per level anymore. You can max out life per level up to 50 in the base game. So it is kind of a caveat, but the idea is to keep stats a little bit lower, and especially health, so that I can then go through and then just kind of change and potentially gut a lot of the high damage enemies that just are way too fast for the damage they deal. The stamina ring also adds just 2 flat stamina, which is the equivalent of 2 stat points again, instead of 5%. So this is actually a nerf, but you can stack it, so it's kind of a buff if you want stamina in 2 slots. HP on Perfect Block Charm was buffed in a previous patch so that it is basically instant and it's a lot more health. I think they also buffed this to 3 seconds at some point in one of the balance patches, one of the later release patches, post-release patches. Same with the focus points on Perfect Block. The same charm basically for focus was also buffed to be 5% over 0.1 second. So it's basically instant. It is technically a buff in the back end of the game. So I still used a number that is not 0 to make sure that it actually works, because I didn't read through how that worked and I just wanted to make sure that it's still using the timer. And that'll basically do how that does. Elemental resist charms buffed from 20 flat to 30 flat. So this is your poison ring, your fire amulet, whatnot. I may change this, we'll see. But the idea is that in Salt 1, you had rings and the armor value difference is 2 times. So 25 in Salt 2 is equivalent to 50 in Salt 1, and rings gave 50 in Salt 1. So the idea is to kind of buff them in Salt 2 to make them actually worthwhile. And you can only wear 1 amulet versus 4 rings. There's not an interchangeable aspect to the charm system in Salt 2. So I figured, if you can only wear 1 of them, it's 30 flat. But since the poison ring is actually an exception to this rule, the poison ring might stay at 20. We'll see. Because you can only wear 1, right? You can only wear 1 or the other. And I might move that around. It might not always stay on amulets. Maybe some more rings will be there. Maybe some things will be moved around or whatnot. The leather amulet, now, instead of giving 10% global damage, it now gives 15% range damage. So you could wear 2 leather rings and a leather amulet and be doing all sorts of stuff there. The Chronomancer amulet no longer gives restock speed. It comes too late into the gameplay, and it just didn't. I don't think most players are ever going to care about that. It's a great stat, I think, for artifacts. I don't think it's a great stat for amulets, because there's so many things that you could wear there instead. So the Chronomancer amulet now gives 5% attack speed, 5% movement speed, which increases your run speed as well, by the way, because run speed is just a multiplier on your movement speed. And 5% cast speed, which is just the release of spells, which is a pretty short animation, but still 5% cast speed. So nice little thing. And this is also a little bit of a callback to something like Diablo, where an amulet might give 10% cast speed as well. Artifacts, we're almost done. Artifacts now actually upgrade at the vendor with memories. Only new artifacts can do this, though, because the old artifacts were not coded in a way that made this possible. Upgrading an artifact in the old system would, upgrading in this case being called bolstering, it would change their seed because the tiering, the level of the artifact and the seed were the same thing. It was one number used for both. So this has been split apart, but it can only be split apart for new artifacts. So internally, they're version 1 artifacts. So old artifacts will still work, except for the silver lost on death thing, which is turned off. But will be re-rolled if bolstered, and they will be re-rolled into new artifacts, version 1 artifacts, which have a separate seed and upgrade statistic in their data. Eventually, I'd like to have bolster and re-roll be separate menu options. Currently, I have not been successful in messing with the UI and making that possible. This would allow you to re-roll both old and new artifacts and upgrade them, upgrade new artifacts, and restrict the logic of that. So you wouldn't accidentally re-roll an old artifact. You would only be able to re-roll it if you went to the correct menu. Because a lot of players hate this and are confused by it, because it's like, would you like to upgrade and re-roll? Sure. Wait, re-roll? I didn't. Oh, crap. And then they realized what it was saying, because it did both upgrade and re-roll at the same time because of how the seed was set up. So I figured a way around that, but it does have to be a new artifact. And since I was already rewriting that, I decided to rewrite artifacts entirely, more or less. So there are not as many stats that are tedious, in my opinion. So there's no damage to undead, damage to Inquisitor, damage to mages, damage to minions, damage to Hazeburnt, damage to bosses. All of those have been removed because I don't like them. And I'm guessing that most players didn't actually like them. They just saw them as damage to this thing that I'm struggling with, or damage to PvP. And so we've got other stats in there now. So also on the defensive, we no longer have, plus flat to fire, plus flat to physical, plus flat to cold, light, poison. What did I miss? Dark. So those stats on the defensive, they were cluttery, and it meant that you really wanted kind of like this all-rounder artifact anyways, and your chances of getting that were not very high, and you might want other stats on the defensive artifact that wasn't just raw defense. So a lot of new stats added. So for example, in place of the fire, physical, etc., it is now just percentage all defense. However, we have sacrificed another stat that apparently I've never seen, or don't remember ever seeing. Apparently there is a defensive stat, which is percentage damage reduction. And that has been removed. So it's all just defense. There's no secondary systems here. It's just defense. Because percentage damage reduction would mean that it would be multiplicative with armor, and also just god tier in general. So I'd rather balance this around other modifiers and playstyles than just simply, 50 to fire and then 20% damage reduction somewhere along the way. because that's introducing a whole nother system that doesn't really make sense with what's already there. For example, 20% extra health, if a multiplier would actually be the same thing. Kind of. Until you take healing into account. But there is now Thorns on Parry, as mentioned, way above. Movement speed as a flat modifier, it can go up to plus 50, which is a 10% total movement speed. Riposte damage is now a stat. It was already a charm stat, but now it's also an artifact stat. There's health regeneration. Let's see here. There is one that's not hooked up. It's down here. Chance for ammo to pierce. I put this on a crossbow in enhanced game mode for Salt 1, but it's not hooked up yet in Salt 2 because it needs quite a bit of work. I need to figure out where to put it, how to put it, etc. And then make sure that it doesn't hit the same enemy multiple times. But the idea would be this is, again, a very Diablo-esque style stat, as the artifacts and amulets and rings and stuff remind me more of Diablo than Dark Souls in a lot of their use cases. So the idea here is it doesn't matter which ranged weapon you have, you would have a chance for the ammo to pierce through the target. This would be helpful in certain cases for mages or certain cases for certain bosses, which have maybe added minions, added enemies, such as Grendenia, Swamp Grandma, and which can be a little bit of a struggle if you're low on damage and you're a mage. You don't want to get up in their face and kill them with your sword because it's not very high damage, but you might need to drink or use your ranged weapon. And so little things like this would help with some of the cluttery effects of the game, but it's also just fun. It's meant to just be fun. So the idea is that ammo to pierce, I think, is supposed to cap out around 100%, so that you can just, if you really wanted to focus that stat, you could 100% pierce with your ranged weapon. So just throwing knives and stuff like that. Let's see here. Legendary artifacts drop chances have been reduced, so they are more rare. Stats in general are a little bit more powerful and they start a little higher. So while legendaries are rarer, the stats that do drop are going to be more commonly useful because all defense is better than fire defense, potentially. All of the rarities have been increased to 30%. So it's 30, 30, 30, 10. They have higher base damage as mentioned, or higher base values as mentioned. So the base game, you'd have rolls like 0.25% attack speed to 5% attack speed, and you could get that off of the first boss, or damage, and you could get that off of the first boss Urix. And so I have picked up artifacts that are like plus 0.2% attack damage, and this drives me bonkers because why even drop something at that point? I would argue you should either drop something that's valuable or don't drop it, for the most part. There's cases for junk in games like Diablo, I think, to have like broken weapons in Diablo 1 or you know, less valuable items that might be valuable in certain circumstances in other Diablo or Path of Exile or whatnot games. But in this case, you get one artifact per boss kill, and you can't get them really anywhere else other than a handful of chests. So if that drops, it should be good. So in this case, things like damage, which caps out at 20%, or attack speed, which caps out at 20%, these now are a base of 4 and a roll of 3%. So they can roll anywhere between 4 and 7%. And that's at level 0. And then they gain something like 0.5 per rank up. So they will get, 10% on top of that or so by level 20. And I think level 20 is somewhere around the late game for some of the nameless bosses and maybe the final boss. Many of those might be 16, but a lot of those are, I think, also around 18 to 20 as well. So your base value here then would become 14 to 17% in the late game, would be a very valuable item. However, I pulled a Diablo 2 on you, and the higher the rarity it is, it has a modifier downward on its stat numbers. So I know that that'll probably be highly controversial, but I've tried to calculate everything to make sure that even legendaries can be capped out at level 40, which is the highest tier of artifacts. What this means is that lower rarity artifacts will and can cap out their stats earlier than higher rarity artifacts. And so you could potentially have a single artifact that hits 17% attack speed or 17% damage in New Game. And in New Game Plus, maybe you find a legendary and you start upgrading it with memories and stuff like that, or they're just dropping from higher level bosses. So you could still cap them out. You'll just cap them out way earlier if it's a single stat one. So think of this as kind of like charms in Salt 1, where you could pick up a Mossy Charm and it was always 10%. And there's no randomness here. And it wasn't a random drop from an enemy either. So the idea would be is 4 to 7% is nice. Eventually you'll get a higher tier one and you'll probably get 10%. So you'll be able to get a 10% attack speed, 10% reach, 10% damage, relatively fairly. But it is a 7% nerf-ish per rarity tier. So the legendaries are 20% weaker, but they have 4 times the modifiers. So big change, very Diablo-esque, very Zephyr's being weird again. So it is what it is. You'll just have to accept it and move on. Lower tier artifacts, there's a weird little restriction that was in the game. I've removed it. Lower tier artifacts were restricted based on their level to their tier, to their affixes. So a level 0 offensive artifact could only have 1 modifier. This is no longer true. So Urks can drop legendary artifacts or rares or uncommons or whatever the rarities are called. So you could get a 4-stat artifact right off of Urks. It's still going to be relatively good. Even a 20% nerf on 4% attack speed is, you know, more than 3%, and that's before the damage or the rarity variance roll. Running out of words. I've used them all up. As I'm known to do. Enemies, we're almost done. If you're still with me, thank you. This mod has been a joy to work on, so I want to share it. Enemies. Various enemies deal extremely high damage or extremely fast damage, and I feel like they need to be rebalanced. So all of Alterstone is probably on the chopping block for just being way too much damage. A lot of enemies in that region can grab you instantly. So I want to put some grab grace period on things. So if you're, you know, the grab hitbox basically shouldn't exist until some percentage of the animation is over. Which means that if you see them start to leap into the air to grab you, you should be able to have, let's say, 0.1 seconds to roll. You'd have to be pretty quick. Eye-hand coordination may not even be functional at 0.1 seconds, but nonetheless, you'd have to be pretty quick. But the idea is putting some kind of grace period there. So if they've only been in the animation for 0.1 seconds or something, they have not yet grabbed you. They are not capable of grabbing you, so it would ignore this. But I haven't built that yet. I don't know how easy that's going to be built. Hopefully it's just a timer that'll work. If so, that'll be a really easy thing to introduce. And I can already hear the cheering from a couple people. In my head, I'm imagining people cheering, I should say. I also want to adjust enemy phase-ins, specifically mage summons will phase in. They technically have damage reduction during this period, but they do not have damage reduction to themselves, dealing damage to you. So you can have an enemy phase in, immediately grab you, and potentially one-shot you before you even see it happening, because between the grabs And the phase-ins, things are just happening too fast. So if I can't change the phase-in easily, then simply their damage will probably be nerfed if they hit you within that phase-in. And hopefully I can change the phase-in so that they can't instantly grab you in that grace period, and so that grace period will also help you dodge them if they try to grab you, because the grab damage would be delayed and not just the phase-in damage. So anyways, most likely they should probably take full damage, and you should take full damage, or they should take half damage and you take half damage, but something should be relatively 1-to-1 on that is my idea. And maybe even stagger should be 50% too. The Dead Samurai have been a first target of one of these changes. The Dead Samurai slash attack has revealed to me that enemies do not have, or most enemies do not have, motion values to their attacks. So they just have a multiplier based on their tier, which probably explains why certain enemies absolutely suck to get hit by. They do have poise motion values, but again, these seem to be used very sparingly. So the Dead Samurai has a slash down, slash up, slash sideways, something triple slash. It does full damage in the base game. And testing this, my character was taking 52 damage. I think he was naked, but he was like level 78. Even at that level, you would have probably a maximum of around 160 to 170 life. They do, I think, cold physical or cold arcane or something like that. I know they do cold, I'm pretty sure. 90% sure they do cold. So, you know, if you have 170 health, you know, let's say 170 health divided by 52, you know, they could 3-shot you. And these guys are not spawning in one at a time. They're often spawning in 2 or even 3 at a time on a platform. The Haze Burnt can come along, or the bosses can come along and aggro them. They can ledge guard, they can dash at you, they can stab at you. You can get hit 7 times in 1 second by these guys because of how many there are, or there might be a Haze Burnt ready to hit you too. So they do 25% less damage on their triple attack. This means all slashing attacks, because their triple attack is just an extension of their slash. It's just a combo animation. But they do less damage, which means that they do something closer to 28 damage instead of 52. They'll still probably hit you 3 times. So it's still quite a bit of damage. You're just not going to get one-shotted by random enemy number 13. Which might be, you know, paired up with number 14, number 15, and neutral enemy 7. So, speaking of neutral enemy 7, Haze Burnt enemies also have less health and less damage. And in testing this briefly, I have felt that this feels great. They are not taking 6 shots or 5 shots to kill, so their time to kill is lowered. Their hits to kill, ETK, HTK, have been lowered in that regard, which feels good, because a lot of animations for weapons do hit only 2 or 3 times before they start repeating, or they have some kind of pause before you can repeat them. So Haze Burnt enemies have always been a bane of my existence. They ledge guard regularly. I know that there's been some edits to the code that allows less of them to spawn in a given region, so that they aren't stacked up on top of each other, because they can basically stack up on top of each other. I believe they can still stack up to 6, or excuse me, there's 6 in a region at a time, which means that they could technically spawn on the same ledge and ledge guard still, but they're better. They're better. But now they'll do less damage too. Damage is dealt across 20 seconds instead of 60. Like Sanctuary, this means it's a giant buff to anything that deals damage as poison. You do have 3 antidotes, so use them wisely. As well, your damage as poison deals damage over 20 seconds. Now, as a note, most poison damage in Salt 2 is direct damage. It is not damage over time. It is not the debuff of poison. So unless you enchant your weapon or use a spell, it typically does not do dot damage over time. So the ones that do damage over time now will do it across 20 seconds instead of 60. It still requires a build-up for some reason, and I will probably end up removing the build-up mechanic from Salt 2 because there are other damage types that do dot, and they don't use a build-up mechanic, so it makes no sense that poison does, unless poison is somehow significantly stronger. So we'll play that one by ear. Since I've changed how solar works, I don't think solar bags are useful anymore. I want to remove them from the vendor's sell sheet and vendor page, and then remove silver bags from all pickups. So there are pickups for silver. They can be useful, don't get me wrong, but I don't think they're very interesting. So I'd like to potentially replace them with things like memories so that I can potentially ease players into actually using memories and using bolstering as I get the artifact system cleaned up even further with the menu options. Similarly, bags of salt could be useful. Starstones, there have been some starstones removed from the map back in alpha that are now things like pyres. So putting some starstones in some silver in replaces some of the silver bags could be good, and other things. I also want to remove, and this isn't written here, I want to remove herb drops from enemies. I do think that herbs in Irona dropping from enemies is a nice feature. I say that sarcastically a little bit, but I'd rather you actually get what you need when you're harvesting than get what you need from enemy kills at a 50% chance ratio. How the game actually drops this is every enemy has some kind of like 50-50 chance to drop either an herb or an Irona ore. So it's either ammo or a health potion refill. Ammo refill or health potion refill. One of the problems with this is you're most likely using more ammo than health potions, but also it takes away the feel of actually farming for these. And I actually like the Monster Hunter effect of actually having to go and hit stones with a pickaxe. So I'm not saying you should do that for hours on end, but between the silver changes and the potion changes and some other stuff, I think that the average player should be able to just simply go and buy ammo if they're really not wanting to interact with the pickaxe system. If you actually are hitting those outcroppings, then you're probably not running out unless you're going a full ranged build, which I have done at much, much lower Irona drops. In alpha, my first character ever was like 80% ranged. I would use ranged until I ran out of ammo, and I would usually get enemies to around 80% dead. Due to being a monster hunter, I want to embrace that aspect of the game. I'd like to make it more viable to hunt repeated mages. One of the biggest issues mage hunts is that wild mage hunts actually deplete. You can replete them, undeplete them, restore them. Words are hard. Like I said, I'm using all the words up. They're gone. I'd like to make them repeatable in some fashion that's not random. So wild mages are random. I don't necessarily want to dig into that system because it's probably pretty tricky. Or it might just take too long. Like, time is of the essence, right? So I want to change it so that potentially you could repeat named mage hunts, but probably not get any resources off of the hunt itself. You would just get the mage kill. And I'd have to do something with the menus, and menus have their own system. Ska has its own tool. Ska and Devoured, two separate companies technically, but basically James and Shane. And I want to mess with that, and I'll probably just put it into the named mage hunt section, but change how it like orders things. So you'll get your named quest mage hunts at the top, and below that you'll get your repeatable mage hunts at the bottom. And they won't be called name mage hunts, and I'll change the localization. Anything I've changed for text is English only. The best I'm going to be able to do is something like Google Translate, so I'm not going to be doing that. And I'm sorry, but that's the only language I speak. Anyways, thank you for stopping by and listening to this overview of the mod. It is now available on Nexus Mods. I will put the link in the description below. If you want to join the community, click the Discord link. We're a small community. I'd love for more people to join us. We pretty much just yell into the void at each other about game mechanics and what we like or dislike, and how we're all very different. And until next time, I will be showing some actual footage of this mod, and hopefully I can talk someone into doing a parry only run.